Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and obviously a little bit difficult task to follow the leader of the official opposition, but I will do my best to carry on with our message with this NDP Opposition Day motion, which I also agree doesn't go far enough. It doesn't put a lot of the blame of the inflationary crisis that we are facing where most of it belongs, which is on government spending. You cannot say that CEOs and corporate Canada or global companies are the ones that are driving inflation when you have a federal government that has put in $500 billion in government spending, which is having a significant impact on prices that Canadians are facing all across the board. And I find it a little bit interesting that we have our NDP colleagues a little bit of schizophrenia, where every opportunity they have to support increased spending and tripling the carbon tax, they're voting with the government. And yet this motion today is trying to say that we are trying to make life more affordable for Canadians. And I thought it was interesting that the leader of the NDP yesterday in question period was having concerns about the rising gas prices, especially in his province of BC, where we see that fuel has hit $2.40 a litre. Well, that's kind of exactly what Liberal and NDP policy wants to achieve. They want you to have higher fuel prices. They want you to be forced to drive your car less. And I'm sure that works in many of the urban communities that my colleagues come from, where, you know, on some days you can park your car, you can take public transit, you can ride your bike. Well, my riding is almost 30,000 square kilometers. Public transit doesn't exist. It literally does not exist in my riding. My constituents must drive their car. They must drive long distances to work. They must heat their homes, heat their barns in minus 40 degree weather in January. These are facts of life. These are necessities of life. These are not extravagant choices. This is what we have to do. But in response to that, our Liberal colleagues, and supported by the NDP, want to triple the carbon tax. And I'm going to focus a little bit on the agriculture sector and the impact that is having on our rural economies and rural Canadians. I would argue that rural Canadians are, especially our farmers and producers and ranchers, they pay the carbon tax over and over and over again. It was interesting, my Liberal colleague was saying that, well, farmers are price takers. The carbon tax does not have an impact on the price of food. That is true. They are price takers. However, when you triple the carbon tax, you're tripling the price of fuel. We've seen the price of fertilizer go up 100% last year. That does not include the 35% tariff on fertilizer from Russia and Belarus. That impacts hauling their grain, hauling their cattle, transportation to the terminal. All of those times, every single time, they're paying that carbon tax over and over and over again. And when the company hauling your grain or the rail company, they pass that carbon tax on to the consumer. Every time those prices go up to those transportation services or those commodity services, that is impacting the price of food. And that is why we have seen the cost of groceries go up more than 10%, the highest rate of inflation in more than 40 years. So I understand my NDP colleagues when they say that the CEOs in Canada should pay their fair share. I agree with that. Every Canadian should pay their fair share. And if there are loopholes, this government's been in power for 7 years, they should be holding taxpayers accountable for paying their fair share. And obviously they haven't done that. But to shift the blame from where it lies to other parts of the economy is disingenuous. And there was this interesting stat that came up yesterday during Agriculture Committee that I want to make sure that we highlight. And we've kind of heard it from my Bloc colleague, who I have a lot of respect for as well, that there is, climate change is real, but to put the price of fighting climate change on the backs of Canadian farmers isn't fair. Let's be real here, as my colleague was saying. Let's have an honest conversation about this. GHG intensity in agriculture is about 28% globally. Do you know what it is in Canada, Madam Speaker? 8%. Wow. 8%. We are tenfold better than any other country in the world when it comes to GHG emissions and GHG intensity in the agriculture sector in Canada. On the fertilizer issue, the Liberal government wants to have a 30% reduction in fertilizer use. As I said, grocery prices have gone up 10%. If the Liberals follow through with this policy, all I can say to Canadian consumers, you ain't seen nothing yet. When farmers have to see their yields go down between 30 and 50%, depending on what the commodity is, that means significantly lower yields and significantly higher grocery prices. That has nothing to do with the CEO of Loblaws. That has exactly to do with government policy put forward by the Liberals.
Yep.
But again, what makes that so frustrating is they are saying to Canadian farmers that you're not part of the solution, you're the problem. Again, Canadian farmers are 50 to 70% more efficient in our fertilizer use than any other country on planet Earth. And instead of being congratulated for that, instead of going around the world and say, hey, we are the gold standard, here's where everybody else in the world should go, we are apologizing. We are dragging our farmers down to where everybody else is. That is the wrong philosophy and certainly the wrong policy. And all you are doing is making our farmers worse off. It's more harmful to the environment, and food prices are going to go up. It's the triple whammy. So instead of doing the right thing and being a champion and advocate for Canadian farmers, you're going the exact opposite direction. But there are other policies that the Liberals have put forward that have made the cost of groceries and the cost of food go up. And I really want to focus on this part. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the carbon tax again. And my colleague from the Bloc brought that up. In the Agriculture Committee, we were talking about Bill C-234, a private member's bill brought forward by the Conservatives to exempt natural gas and propane from the carbon tax on farms. This is a critical piece of legislation that will ensure our farmers are able to remain competitive on the global stage. But the Liberals are arguing that we don't need C-234 because farmers get a rebate through C-8. But we now know from Finance Canada, their officials, that the average farmer will get about $800 back a year through that rebate.
Shame.
We know that farmers pay close to $50,000 a year on average in a carbon tax. When I asked the representative from Finance Canada, I said, how do you argue that the carbon tax is revenue neutral when you were admitting to me that the average farmer is getting about $800, $860 back? His answer, well, if we made it revenue neutral, that means that urban Canadians would have to subsidize that. Okay. So you're telling me right now that rural Canadians are subsidizing the carbon tax and a wealth redistribution for urban Canadians.
Exactly.
Is what you're telling me.
Shame.
That is not what the Liberal policy on the carbon tax was. They said it was going to be revenue neutral. 8 out of 10 families were going to get more back than they paid for. Baloney. Rural Canadians are suffering and certainly paying significantly more in that carbon tax than other Canadians. And that's not what the Liberals are selling. So again, it's Liberal policy that is driving inflation and driving up the price of food. But it's going to get worse, Madam Speaker. Although we had a bit of a win this spring when we got the Liberals to back down on front-of-pack labeling on ground beef and pork, they're still going ahead with front-of-pack labeling on most other products. The cost of that is going to be $1.8 billion to the industry.
Who pays for that?
Who do you think pays for that? I can guarantee you Galen Weston at Loblaws is not covering that cost. I can guarantee you French's Ketchup is not covering that cost. They are passing that right on to the consumer.
Exactly.
Again, Liberal policy that no one asked for, that serves very little purpose, is going to be passing on $2 billion in costs to the Canadian consumer for no reason.
Shame.
Not to mention the United States has already identified this policy as a trade irritant. So not only are we upsetting Canadian consumers, we're also upsetting our #1 trading partner, which is looking for every excuse possible to fight back against Canadian trade. So, Madam Speaker, in conclusion, I appreciate what my NDP colleague is trying to achieve with this motion, and certainly are there many portions of it that we agree with. Certainly CEOs should pay their fair share. Certainly affordable food should be available for every Canadian. But the facts are the facts. And inflation is being driven by ideological activist policy by this Liberal government. And that should be the focus of this House.